Afghanistan, Panjshir forces claim hundreds of Taliban captured. Taliban reportedly meets stiff resistance after pushing deep into Afghanistan's holdout Panjshir Valley. Taliban and opposition forces continue to battle to control the Panjshir Valley north of Kabul, with resistance fighters saying they captured hundreds of Taliban troops. The National Resistance Front (NRF) of Afghanistan, grouping forces loyal to local leader Ahmad Massoud, said on Sunday it surrounded thousands of terrorists in Kawak Pass and the Taliban abandoned vehicles and equipment in the Dashti Rewak area. Al Jazeera's Charles Stratford, based in the capital Kabul, reported sources on the ground said hundreds of Taliban fighters had been taken prisoner on Sunday. Sources within the valley are saying the NRF are claiming to have captured about 1,500 Taliban. Apparently, these fighters were surrounded, said Stratford. Dashti wrote on Twitter that Paryan district had been completely emptied of Taliban fighters. Nearly 1,000 Taliban fighters were either killed, wounded, or taken captive after the exit route behind them was closed off. Dashti said. The information could not be verified independently. Meanwhile, Taliban spokesman Bilal Karimi said on Twitter on Sunday its forces seized 5 of the province's 7 districts. Karimi said King and Unaba districts had been taken. He said, "The Mujahideen Taliban fighters are advancing toward the center of the province," he wrote. Panjshir is the last Afghan province holding out against the armed group that swept to power last month. Both sides claim to have the upper hand in Panjshir, but neither could produce conclusive evidence to prove it. The Taliban was unable to control the valley when it ruled Afghanistan from 1996 to 2001. U.S. General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, underscored the tenuous situation. "My military estimate is that the conditions are likely to develop of a civil war. I don't know if the Taliban is going to be able to consolidate power and establish governance," Milley said. If the Taliban cannot quash resistance, it will in turn lead to a reconstitution of al-Qaeda or a growth of ISIS or other myriad of terrorist groups over the next 3 years, said Milley. Emergency, an Italian medical aid organization, said Taliban forces had pushed further into the Panjshir Valley on Friday night, reaching the village of Anaba where the group has medical facilities. Vietnam and Afghanistan, a tale of 2 U.S. military withdrawals. Washington, D.C., images of the chaotic last days of the U.S. mission in Afghanistan have been compared widely to the scenes of the final evacuation from Saigon in 1975 as the victorious North Vietnamese army rolled into the capital of South Vietnam. Iconic photos of desperate Vietnamese trying to scale the walls of the U.S. Embassy bear a striking resemblance to those of civilians clambering up the gates of Kabul airport last month in hopes of catching one of the last flights out of the country. In hindsight, the parallels between the American experience in Vietnam and Afghanistan are too many to ignore. Just like the U.S. began a rapid military drawdown in Vietnam after signing the Paris Peace Accords with North Vietnam in 1973, the February 2020 Doha deal between the U.S. and the Taliban set the scene for America's rush for the exits in Afghanistan. By 1975, the only U.S. soldiers remaining in South Vietnam were the Marines who guarded the embassy in Saigon and a small contingent at a nearby air base. By the end of April that year, the city, later renamed Ho Chi Minh City, had fallen to the North Vietnamese Army (NVA). The U.S. had hoped that the peace accords would allow for the Vietnamization of the conflict, transferring combat operations and security away from the U.S. military to the Army of the Republic of Vietnam (ARVN). But just like the Afghan National Army, in which Washington had invested billions in training and equipment, proved incapable of securing the country on their own. The ARVN crumbled in the absence of the full complement of U.S. ground combat units and field advisors. For a long time after the humiliating end to the Vietnam War, the U.S. seemed to suffer from a crisis of confidence, questioning its strength, the appeal of its values and its role in the world. "This will be the final message from Saigon Station," wrote Thomas Polgar, the last serving CIA station chief in Saigon, before his evacuation. "It has been a long and hard fight and we have lost. This experience, unique in the history of the U.S., does not signal, necessarily, the demise of the U.S. as a world power." He added, "Those who fail to learn from history are forced to repeat it. Let us hope that we will not have another Vietnam experience and that we have learned our lesson." Saigon signing off. American military historians would be right to assess that the lessons of Vietnam were lost when the U.S. pursued another open-ended war whose initial limited objectives were overtaken by a zeal for nation-building. As with Saigon in the late 1960s and early 1970s, the government in Kabul supported by the U.S. military lacked the competence and broad legitimacy to combat an insurgency on its own. I am not optimistic about the ability of the South Vietnamese armed forces to assume a larger part of the burden than current plans allow. He wrote, adding, Hanoi's adoption of a strategy designed to wait us out fits both with its doctrine of how to fight a revolutionary war and with its expectations about increasingly significant problems for the U.S. In both the Vietnam and Afghanistan missions, time and lack of strategic patience were America's main weaknesses in the face of a stubborn insurgency. Of the 4 different administrations that have guided U.S. foreign policy since the Afghan War began, none took a step back to assess the likelihood of success as rationally and impartially as Kissinger did in the 1969 memo. Although the Afghanistan mission did not produce the kind of civil disturbance and political turmoil synonymous with the Vietnam War, there was a broad consensus among U.S. politicians for some time now that an indefinite military involvement in the culturally distant Central Asian country was not desirable. Now that the Afghanistan chapter is closed, some point to the fact that the post-1975 period has seen a slow but remarkable rapprochement between the U.S. and Vietnam. Within the space of 20 years, the former belligerent nations were able to forge a relationship that today has evolved into a veritable strategic partnership, symbolized by the U.S.-Vietnam Comprehensive Partnership of 2013. A quarter of a century after the establishment of bilateral relations in 1995, the U.S. and Vietnam are thus partners with a friendship grounded in mutual respect and suspicion of China's geopolitical motives. Clearly, the time-worn tribal partnership between the Haqqani Network, which is an integral part of the Taliban, and al-Qaeda, will be a major complicating factor in the Taliban's ability or willingness to prevent the international terror group from rebounding. For the moment, the Taliban seem to be making all the right noises. The political leadership has emphasized that they are pursuing a nationalist vision, not a transnational one. What remains to be seen is whether the group can prioritize the needs of running the affairs of state, which will require significant outside financial support and technical expertise, over a wild-eyed revolutionary vision that includes terror sanctuaries. In Vietnam, military victory over the U.S. did not translate to a strategic defeat of the U.S. and the anti-communist bloc globally, Carafano told Arab News. Both Republican and Democratic administrations have taken successive steps toward strengthening Washington's commitment to a security partnership with Vietnam. Previously unthinkable, U.S. Navy aircraft carriers are now allowed to dock in Vietnamese ports. Whether the U.S. and Taliban-controlled Afghanistan can develop some level of security arrangement based on a common threat perception is an open-ended question. Taliban announce new government for Afghanistan. The Taliban have announced an interim government in Afghanistan, declaring the country an Islamic emirate. It will be led by Mullah Muhammad Hassan Akhunda as the new leader of the government of Afghanistan. In a statement attributed to Taliban Supreme Leader Hibatullah Akhundzada, the government will uphold Sharia law. He submitted, first and foremost, I congratulate our suffering and proud nation on withdrawal of all foreign forces, end of the occupation, and complete liberation of the country. As a caretaker and committed cabinet has been announced by the authorities of the Islamic Emirate to control and run the affairs of the country, which will start functioning at the earliest, I assure all the countrymen that the figures will work hard towards upholding Islamic rules and Sharia law in the country, protecting the country's highest interests, securing Afghanistan borders and to ensuring lasting peace, prosperity and development, God willing. He added. Additionally, Akhundzada said our previous 20 years of struggle and jihad had 2 major goals. Firstly, to end foreign occupation and aggression and to liberate the country, and secondly, to establish a complete independent, stable and central Islamic system in the country. We want to have a peaceful, prosperous and a self-reliant Afghanistan, for which we will strive to eliminate all causes of war and strife in the country, and our countrymen to live in complete security and comfort. He said. He said that the Islamic Emirate will take serious and effective steps towards protecting human rights, the rights of minorities as well as the rights of the underprivileged groups within the framework of the sacred religion of Islam. On education, he submitted that it is one of the most important requirements of the country and that his government will have a duty to provide a healthy and safe environment for religious and modern sciences to all countrymen within the framework of Sharia. Ashraf Ghani apologizes to Afghans, says he fled to ensure peace. Afghanistan's former president Ashraf Ghani has said it was never his intent to abandon the people as he apologized to Afghans for the way his rule came to an end when he fled the country last month on the same day the Taliban entered the capital, Kabul. In a statement published on Twitter on Wednesday, Ghani said he left on August 15 at the urging of the palace security to avoid the risk of bloody street fighting, and again denied stealing millions from the treasury. Leaving Kabul was the most difficult decision of my life, but I believed it was the only way to keep the guns silent and save Kabul and her 6 million citizens, he said. Ghani took the opportunity to deny the claims that he had taken millions of dollars out of the country when he fled, even saying that he was ready to be investigated to prove his innocence. The claims originated with a former Afghan ambassador to neighboring Tajikistan, Zahir Akbar, who alleged Ghani took about $169 million with him when he left the country. Ghani, who is currently in Abu Dhabi, lamented that, like his predecessors, he too had been unable to bring peace and prosperity to the war-torn country. It is with a deep and profound regret that my own chapter ended in a similar tragedy to my predecessors. I apologize to the Afghan people that I could not make it end differently. Taliban fighters took over Kabul after a lightning-fast offensive launched in May as the United States and NATO began withdrawing troops, in the space of 10 days before taking the capital. The Taliban had seized a string of other cities, meeting little or no resistance in a staggering rout. In an interview with Afghan outlet Tolo News, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Ghani had told him the night before he fled Afghanistan that he was prepared to fight to the death. Rule came to an end when he fled the country. I certainly didn't know about it, and we certainly did nothing to facilitate it, Blinken said. Responding to another question, Blinken said he did not know whether Ghani had taken millions of dollars in cash with him. That, I don't know. What I do know is that he left the country, and again, in a very short period of time. The security forces as an institution collapsed and so did the government. Ghani's statement came a day after the Taliban announced their new interim government, with established hardliners in all key posts and no women. Despite previous promises to form an inclusive administration, separately on Wednesday, the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross appealed to other humanitarian organizations to return to Afghanistan and for the World Bank to unlock funds to support the country's weak healthcare system. ECOWAS mediators heading to Guinea to meet coup leaders. A delegation from West Africa's main political and economic bloc will head to Guinea on Friday, 2 days after it suspended the country's membership in response to a military coup that removed President Alpha Condé. The foreign ministers of Burkina Faso, Ghana, Nigeria and Togo are due to land in the capital, Conakry, as representatives of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. Alpha Berry, the Burkinabe member of the delegation, said on Thursday. The high-level diplomatic mission is expected to demand the return to constitutional order and to push for the immediate release of Condé, who was arrested by special forces led by Lieutenant Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya on Sunday. ECOWAS has demanded 83-year-old Condé's unconditional release but has made no mention of any possible sanctions. The military will want to keep Condé as a bargaining chip during negotiations, said Al Jazeera's Ahmed Idris, reporting from Conakry. Life in the capital was gradually returning to normal on Thursday, with markets reopening their doors as citizens await the announcement of a new government. Consultations have been going on, but apparently this is taking much longer than the coup leaders had expected, Idris added. Doumbouya maintains he is acting in the best interests of the nation, accusing Condé's government of endemic corruption and of trampling on citizens' rights. He has pledged to install a transitional government of national unity but has not said when or how that will happen. The coup in Guinea sparked broad diplomatic condemnation, including by the United Nations and the African Union. It was the fourth in 13 months in West and Central Africa, raising concerns among observers over a proliferation of military-led governments in the region. It's very important for ECOWAS, and other international actors to condemn this coup, which was unconstitutional, and to not let a precedent be set that it's all right to depose a government that you simply disagree with. Alex Busha, analyst at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies, told Al Jazeera, clearly what needs to happen is a transition of some sort that brings back democracy and that helps to establish a system where the government is well managed, where human rights are guaranteed and where political participation leads to elections. Busha said. ECOWAS on Wednesday said it had suspended Guinea's membership to the 15-member bloc in response to the coup. However, Alpha Berry, Burkina Faso's foreign minister, told reporters following an extraordinary virtual summit that the bloc could review its decision to suspend Guinea's membership following its mediation.
At the end of that mission,
ECOWAS should be able to re-examine its position, Berry said. Condé became the first democratically elected president in 2010 and was re-elected for a second term in 2015. Last year, he pushed through a constitutional change to allow himself to run for a third term, a move deemed illegal by his opponents. ECOWAS was criticized at the time by activists for remaining silent about Condé's third term, which would have allowed him to remain in power until 2030. Condé went on to win a presidential election in October 2020. Violent protests erupted across the country in response to his re-election, resulting in dozens of protesters being killed. Military leaders on Tuesday released about 80 political opponents that were jailed during the turbulent electoral period on a variety of charges, including breaching security, destroying public property and manufacturing weapons.